From Gaza to Greenland, from leaving NATO to tariffs, during Trump's second term, the same sequence of events happens again and again. Trump tweets. He declares something truly out there, and the world erupts in protest. He can't do that, they proclaim. He says he can. He says he will. And slowly, the world starts to believe he just might. And then everybody starts scrambling for a new agreement. And then what does Trump say? You know what? Let's cut a deal. That's what I wanted all along. The world claims victory, and they proclaim that Trump has backed down. But isn't it obvious by now? It is only when he says that that's what he wanted all along that he is actually telling the whole truth. Why can't the world figure out this very simple tactic? People keep trying to decode how he doesn't play by the rules. They ask if he's a madman or if he's a genius. But what if his goal when he does these things isn't simply to break the rules? What if the entire purpose of those crazy tweets is to erase the rules and start fresh? This is Causality, the news for the symptoms, we provide the diagnosis. My name is Sharon Bar Eretz. I have a background in international relations, political science, and sociology. I'm also a major in the IDF reserves. On this channel, we look at the reasons why events happen the way they do, peeling back the geopolitical veil to see the machinery that drives decisions. Today, we are looking at a political tactic that is frequently observed, widely criticized, but I think almost always misunderstood. My analysis is that those crazy things that Trump says on the world stage are not simply a negotiating strategy taking place within the system. He is instead employing a tactic to achieve something far more rare and far more profound, a paradigm shift. In this video, we're going to look at the problem that Trump often feels he faces when he's trying to act on the world stage and how this tactic solves that problem. We are going to dip our toes into what I mean when I say the word paradigm and how Trump's actions are almost literally revolutionary. We will discuss the different conditions required for this to work and how it is almost unique to Trump, and then walk through the process with examples. Often, when people try to analyze Trump and what and how he acts, they fall into two separate camps. Either they think he is an uncontrollable madman who is dangerously chaotic, or they think he is a genius, a master negotiator, using 4D chess to plan his moves and bend the world to his will. I posit that many of his actions are actually not about getting what he wants within the existing system, rather, they are acts designed to demolish and clear the weeds of the old rules entirely, and to create the conditions to rework new rules. But first, to understand what he's doing, we have to understand the problem he faces. During his first term, Trump was constantly met with barriers. There were so many things which people said he couldn't do. Many times, this was put forward by the adults in the room, those advisors he had brought in from previous Republican administrations, who were tasked in translating his desires into action. But they were those who were explaining to him that most of his goals were impossible. The thing is that many of these impossible goals were not impossible because of strict laws. On the international stage, there are few laws. What they were talking about were paradigms. Human institutions are built on simple foundations when they first form, but over time, layers upon layers upon layers of traditions, routines, and best practices and cultures of interactions are added upon each other and calcify into paradigms. These norms are the unwritten rules of what can and cannot be done. And these paradigms can be incredibly rigid. And most often, any reform happens only within the context of those rules. Changes can be made only at the edges and only slowly. Historically, one of the only ways to get an actual massive fundamental change, a true paradigm shift, is by reverting to a sort of revolutionary state. This usually requires a complete cutting away of the old institutions, wiping away the old and starting new. And usually, this would only happen after a war following a state collapse or a revolution, ergo, revolutionary state, because you are destroying the institutions of the past and building something new. Because it is only then that people can gather around at a table and design new institutions and new ways of doing things from a clean slate. It is only then they can look at the world with fresh eyes, reevaluate what is wanted, what is needed, and what the new rules should be. This is all well and good, but it comes at an extraordinarily high cost because you had to have burned down the old institutions in order to create a new one. Trump recognizes that there are all of these old paradigms which are stopping him from achieving the things he thinks he should be able to achieve. What I think is unique is that Trump seems to have developed a tactic to force something close to that revolutionary clean slate, at least on specific issues, without the high cost of war and revolution, and without having to completely burn down the old order. And this almost completely novel political weapon could probably only be used by Donald J. Trump. To understand why it's new and unique, I have devised 3 preconditions that I think are needed for this trick to work. The first is the arena. It can only work in a system where laws are not strictly codified, and that it is generally ruled by paradigms and norms and convention. This is why this tactic is less successful when Trump is dealing with internal politics, because internally there are actual laws, actual rules, which govern what a president can and cannot do. He has a lot of power, but they are governed by laws. And so when people say he cannot simply do something, sometimes they are correct. But in the international system, it is anarchy in the truest sense of the word. There is no world government. There are few enforceable laws. The system runs on convention. Now, obviously, there are some international laws, but usually those aren't what he's breaking. When people say he cannot do something, it is because it is simply not done. But there is no method of enforcement to make people follow these norms and paradigms. But the second condition you need is that you have to be something close to a hegemonic power. You have to be the superpower. I think only the United States has the gravitational mass to be able to break the system's norms and force the world to reckon with that reality. As we have seen recently, other countries can break norms, but what I'm saying here is to do so by tweet. And having that being effective is unique to Trump and the United States because of the gravitational power it has, where only the threat or the possibility of them doing something is enough to move the needle. And the third condition is his persona. And that is why I think pretty much it is new to Trump, because it rests on a carefully crafted persona of being completely unpredictable and unaccountable. That is the only reason that his craziest proposals seem just plausible enough that it has to be taken seriously. But how does this work in practice? First, he puts out a crazy proposal. He drops a figurative bomb. We're going to buy Greenland. We're going to own Gaza. We're going to pull out of NATO. The immediate reaction is shock. That is impossible. But then we soon move on to the second step. After a quick minute, the world realizes that technically, because the international system is anarchic, he could actually do it. It isn't technically impossible for him to do what he said. And this is the moment of the shift. The paradigm shatters. The unbreakable rule of convention is revealed to be just a shared assumption. And this moves everyone into the third phase, which is the real purpose of this trick. Everyone, both allies and rivals, are forced to scramble for a different solution, but they are doing so in a brand new space. The proposal is so crazy that they are forced to think of things that would have been inconceivable beforehand, anything else which could potentially solve the problem using different means. And because of that, they are able for the first time to look at the problem with fresh eyes, on a fresh slate, and think of previously unthinkable options. And that is what I mean by revolutionary state. They look at the world with anew and think what could be done, what should be done, and what is actually possible, irrespective of how things were done in the past. And then the fourth phase is that Trump accepts the guidelines of a new proposal. He does his flip-flop. He backs away from his crazy proposal, and everyone else claims victory. This sequence of events has happened time and time again. But crucially, for what I'm saying to be true, you don't have to think that Trump is an absolute genius. He doesn't have to be thinking 20 steps ahead to pull this off. All he has to do is recognize that whenever he hits a wall of the impossible, he can say something absolutely crazy, and then everyone else will start thinking of impossible new options. And sometimes those new options will work for him and be advantageous. Now, let's go through a couple of examples. NATO. For decades, the paradigm was that the alliance was a given. The US was the main enforcer, the funder, the benefactor, and everyone else was, in turn, under America's security umbrella, but expected to follow US leadership, but not expected to contribute as much to their own defense. Trump didn't like that game, but he knew that getting into an argument about spending levels can only get you so far. So what did he do? He threatened to pull out of NATO. He put the entire alliance and Article 5 into question. This is different than what some would call extreme anchoring. He wasn't negotiating spending levels. He was destroying the paradigm that NATO's existence was sacred and non-negotiable. This forced the other countries of NATO to look at the global system with fresh eyes, to reevaluate the foundation upon which NATO was founded, to understand that the fundamental soundness and worthiness of the alliance still exists, and to understand both what it needs and what they can contribute to that alliance. It was no longer about simply making changes around the edges of the 20th century agreement. By confronting the existential value of the alliance, they had to reset the alliance on a new foundation with broad changes, not only to the numbers, but also how they viewed the alliance and what they were willing to do for the alliance. Now, let's look at trade. It seems he was unhappy with a lot of the trade relationships the United States has had, and he knew that negotiating with a country around the details of those current agreements would only get him so far. So what did he do at the start of his second term? He proposed a huge, broad, massive tariff against everyone, rivals, allies, everyone. What this did was it forced every country to come to the negotiating table, not to tweak an old relationship they had with the United States, but to justify the entire trade relationships they have with the United States. By looking at the trade relationship with fresh eyes, they were able to get to new agreements based on a new paradigm. Now, let's look at Gaza. Remember when he threw out the idea of a Gazan Riviera, that the US would own Gaza, that the residents would relocate? How much of this was ever really a proposal is questionable. But what it did do was that it unstuck everyone from the old paradigm of a two-state solution, or that only the Palestinian Authority can be given the reins of power. Once that crazy idea is on the table, it broke the old paradigm. Suddenly, other ideas, which might once be considered completely radical and out of the question, like an international force, demilitarization, and so on, didn't seem so crazy anymore. It opened up the room to maneuver, forcing people to look at the problem with fresh eyes, completely outside the old, failed context. If it will ultimately be successful in getting something good, it still is a problem, but at least the old paradigm, which was a proven failure, has now been moved beyond. Greenland is just the latest example of the same thing. He says, I'm going to buy Greenland. I'm going to own Greenland. He even didn't rule out military force for taking Greenland. This forced Denmark and NATO to relook at the situation, not simply to renegotiate on the old terms, but to look at it from fresh eyes. What does the US actually need to secure its interests? What can Europe and Denmark give the US? not in the terms of the old way of doing things, but from fresh eyes. However, it is crucial to understand that this only works in certain situations. It is a powerful tool for shattering paradigms, unwritten rules, shared assumptions that govern interactions, but it is far less effective when dealing with hard realities. Take the Russian-Ukrainian war, for example. This is a situation driven by hard geopolitics, territorial ambition, military force, and deep national interests. It's not based on a fragile international consensus that can be shocked into a new revolutionary state. In this context, there is almost nothing crazy enough for Trump to say which would genuinely force a paradigm shift. Saying that he will end the war in 24 hours doesn't change the fundamental realities on the ground. Russia is still Russia. It still wants what it wants. And its military is still inside Ukraine. And Ukraine is still a state being attacked by Russia who wants to defend its territorial and national interests. The weeds, in this case, are not diplomatic norms. They are tanks, trenches, and national goals that cannot simply be washed away with a verbal grenade. And this shows the tactic's clear boundary. It works when breaking the subjective realities. That being said, we must now look at the most misunderstood part of the tactic, the flip-flop. Critics love to point out that Trump always backs down. He threatens massive tariffs and then signs a deal for much less. He threatens to leave NATO, but of course he doesn't. He threatens to take over Greenland, but then he agrees to an agreement for far, far less. But the reality is the flip-flop is a necessary and key feature, not a bug. It is only because the crazy proposal is just words and is fully retractable that he can actually use it. If he had to go all in with every single crazy proposal he would make, he could never make most of those statements. It would force him to be measured like every other statesman on the world stage. But because he can just put out whatever he wants out there, whenever it works, whenever the paradigm shatters and a new deal emerges, he can accept it, claim victory, and the other side will say that they won simply because he didn't burn the house down. And if it fails completely, he walks it back. Didn't mean it. No harm, no foul. Because he has the persona of being unpredictable, it allows him to shrug it off with minimal political cost. Nothing he says is irreversible. By giving the rest of the world the appearance of victory over him, which I don't really think he cares about, he blinds them to seeing that what he actually gained was what he really wanted, even though he often says that explicitly. But of course, if he was only sitting around tweeting, this tactic would lose its strength over time. And so what he does is that when he does do something that's kind of crazy, he capitalizes on it. Capturing Maduro is probably the biggest example of this. Now, I have a whole video that was released before Maduro's capture detailing why getting rid of Maduro and his regime wasn't actually crazy, but I think everyone can agree that the manner in which it was done was kind of insane. Trump didn't waste the opportunity that granted him. Directly afterwards, he started making a flurry of tweets on all sorts of issues, including Greenland. Because after the evidence of what he did with Venezuela was so clear, everyone had to give him more credit for his crazy proposals. So we can use one or two bold acts on the world stage to prop up a number of crazy proposals and induce everyone else to look at the world from fresh, new eyes under new paradigms. I think by viewing it in this manner, we can move past simply saying that the world that Trump is creating is chaotic and understand that he is using a precise, very low-cost tool for systemic disruption. He has created the mechanism for a single actor to simulate a revolutionary clean slate without the destruction, the war, and the revolution that it usually needs. Again, this is causality. The news reports the symptoms, we provide the diagnosis. If you found this analysis valuable, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, follow me, and retweet me on X, and I've also launched a new Patreon. There I will be posting free articles that might not be suitable for YouTube. The first one is already up. I'm also going to start releasing some bonus content surrounding the videos I release here on YouTube there. On this video, for example, I'll be uploading a behind-the-scenes look at how I came to these conclusions by different thoughts about the world system and Trump's place within it. So if you want to support this channel, you can do that there. There will also be group chats available and more. And it's new, so if you have any suggestions, don't be afraid to leave them down below. Until next time, take care.